Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, and does it look like it's recording?
Yes.
Yeah, it says the recording thing is flashing.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so all things running. If your like little section of the talking heads is like covering the screen, if you just minimize it, then our beautiful faces won't be in the way and you can see the slide content.
Jessica, we're talking to our athletes who are regular working folks. They probably know this.
Okay, fair. All right, so I thought we'd go over some basic exercise physiology. So what do we need to improve to be a better runner? And also just some like misconceptions on terms and whatnot. Like a lot of words get thrown out in training all the time on podcasts or in magazines or whatever. And like sometimes a little bit of knowledge is dangerous and terms get misconstrued. So I thought we would just go through a bit of that. Then we'll talk about heart rate training, a little bit on running form, how to measure progress, a bit on the aging athlete, and then finally a Q&A. So the first thing I wanted to do was a couple definitions. We're basically back in school here, but it's really important to remember that energy for anything you do, not just running, not just strength, even like sitting here breathing, comes from two different systems, aerobic metabolism and anaerobic metabolism, with metabolism basically being like creation of energy. So aerobic metabolism is energy produced using oxygen. So you're breathing in air, goes from your lungs into your bloodstream, oxygenates the muscles, you produce energy, etc., etc. Anaerobic metabolism is energy produced without the use of oxygen. And lactate or lactic acid is a byproduct of anaerobic metabolism. But it's really important to know that you're always doing both types of metabolism, always. Just sitting here, everyone listening is undergoing aerobic and anaerobic metabolism. So the idea of going anaerobic isn't really a thing. It's not like a light switch, like you're suddenly anaerobic. It's more of a dimmer. And so the proportion of these two systems varies depending on how long you're exercising and how hard you're exercising. But there's always an aspect of both all the time. VO2 max is something that everyone equates with just being a really good endurance athlete. So it's the maximum amount of oxygen that you can take in and then bring to your working muscles per minute normally. So it's literally like how many liters are you taking in and using. So think of it as like your big aerobic engine. Your lactate threshold is the maximum speed or intensity, whatever, at which all of your energy can be supplied with aerobic metabolism. And I know I just said you use both, but below lactate threshold, whether that's a speed or a power output, whatever, you're not doing a lot of anaerobic metabolism. You're doing it, but it's essentially negligible. And so you don't have a lot of lactate or lactic acid accumulating in your blood. But above lactate threshold, blood lactate begins to accumulate exponentially. And this is important because having a really high lactate in your blood is one of the reasons why you have to stop exercising, like as in that's your max pace or whatever. So it's a big determinant of exercise performance. And then running economy is how much energy it takes to run a pace. So basically, how efficient are you? You think of economy with cars, like miles per gallon, liters of oxygen per kilometer, that sort of thing. So the goal of training is to increase lactate threshold, VO2 max, and running economy. These are the three things that go into making an athlete run better, faster, harder, stronger, whatever. Okay, I don't have many graphs, but this is one of them. So if you're not a science person, bear with me. But I want to really look at VO2 max and lactate threshold and how they relate to performance. So in this chart, there are two athletes and they're running at different speeds, and it shows how their VO2 max, their VO2, so their oxygen that they're taking in is increasing as their running speed increases. That makes sense. But athlete 1 and athlete 2 have basically the same VO2 max, but they have different lactate thresholds. You can't tell that from this test, but it's just information given to us. That athlete 1 has a lactate threshold at about 70% of their VO2 max. An athlete 2 has a lactate threshold at about 60% of their VO2 max. And you can see what running speed that equates to. But this is really interesting if they were running at a pace of like 7.5 miles per hour. So somewhere between their 2 lactate thresholds. The blue athlete would be accumulating blood lactate, and it would be a hard pace for them. That would probably be something like a tempo pace for this athlete, and they wouldn't be able to do it forever. But red athlete could basically run that pace with relative ease for a very, very, very long time because it's below their lactate threshold. So when you do endurance training, both your lactate threshold and your VO2 max are going to raise, but the really, really, really important parameter that you want to look at is lactate threshold, even more so than VO2 max, because it's not just having an engine, but can you use it? So lactate threshold is very, very, very responsive to training, which is awesome. So when you're training, typically this is what we're trying to change. You shouldn't think of lactate as a bad thing. Like it's not bad to be accumulating lactate or anything like that. It's just that that's what limits performance. So the faster you can run before you start to accumulate lactate in your blood, the better you're going to be.
Right. And one more thing kind of on that note is, so in order to increase usually your tolerance to something, so in this point, lactic acid, you kind of have to expose yourself to that. So how are we exposing you guys to lactic acid? That's in those interval trainings. So kind of when you're running fast and you're accumulating a little bit of lactic acid, but you're teaching your body to metabolize that lactic acid and use it as energy. Once you get better at taking in lactic, metabolizing it, using it as energy, that's when you can start running faster and faster. There just comes a tipping point where you accumulate so much lactic acid and you can't metabolize it. And then that's when you're like, you feel like your legs feel lead and you feel like you can't run any faster. But the point is we're trying to bump up that speed at which that happens. And that comes from lactic tolerance training, which is the same as interval training and doing those harder sessions, whether they're on a track, or whether they're in a fartlek, whether they're in a tempo run. The whole point of that is to increase your tolerance to that.
Mm-hmm. So why do we do the training we do? Thank you, Faye. Excellent foray into this slide. So as all you guys know, our training is polarized. So the vast majority of it is done through easy runs or long runs. The vast majority meaning like minutes. You spend the most time running pretty relaxed. But then you also do tempos or intervals, and they're different lengths with different rests and this and that. And every single different type of training has different effects on the body. So we don't really have to go through this, but I just wanted to show that everything you do is hitting a different system. And so that's why it's so important to have a very well-rounded training program that's varied and changes week to week or within the week, making sure you get some base work, some high intensity work, this and that, because everything's doing something different. Everything's important, and you don't want to neglect any type of training because then you're neglecting adaptations. So how do we gauge pace? This is a question that we've been coming up with, or we've been trying to address a lot lately. A lot of you guys are not quite sure how to nail paces in workouts, and we can talk about this more during the Q&A if you want, if there's anything I can say to make it a little bit more clear. But there are basically 3 ways to do it. The first is rating of perceived exertion. So RPE, how does it feel? Does it feel hard or really hard or super hard or steady hard? Is it moderate? That sort of thing. And while this is pretty subjective, I actually really like this way, especially for newer runners, because it teaches you to read your body and it teaches you to understand how hard too hard is, should you blow up in a workout, or what not pushing yourself enough feels like. If you finish and you're like, okay, I could have done 10 more intervals, then next time you can go back and adjust that. And so you learn to read your body's signals. And that's really important in racing when your very controlled training environment is thrown out the window and you're forced to react to all these new situations and whatnot, and you really want to get the most out of yourself. It can be handy to know, like, okay, this is a hard that I can tolerate for a long time. or like, okay, I'm really suffering, I need to dial things back, or like really get gritty here, or okay, I'm not working hard enough, I should pick this up. So learning that skill, I think, is actually very, very beneficial. You can base paces off of previous workouts or time trials. So if you've done a 10K time trial, you can sort of base intervals around there, or a 5K time trial. You could use a measured distance like a track. You could use a GPS watch, that sort of thing. Or you can do heart rate based training, which I'll get into next. So the premise of heart rate training is to, that is really weird, that slides out of place. The premise of heart rate training is to train with established training zones to make sure that you're working at the right intensity. So you know what your easy zone is, or your hard zone, and you make sure that your heart rate is within those bandwidths. There's a few different ways to establish these zones. The gold standard is a VO2 max test, which is very expensive. It's quite labor intensive. You have to go into a lab to do it. You need like multiple technicians, and it's a lot of physical effort. You can do a field test, which would be running maybe 800s, multiple 800s at different paces, and looking at your heart rate response. But this is difficult to do in more novice athletes because it's really hard to run even paces if you're not experienced with that. Or you can guesstimate based on age or max heart rate, which is what the vast majority of people do. Here is my favorite heart rate zone chart. So it considers zone 1. The percents of heart rate max are pretty classic for these different zones. So you just take your max heart rate, you calculate your zones based on that. Zone 1 would be, by all means, moving at a glacial pace, true recovery zone. Couch to fridge, get some snacks, you're basically just existing. Zone 2, what, like it's hard, you saw a cute dog, it's a warm up or a cool down, that makes sense. Zone 3, picking up the pace, challenging but doable. Zone 4, getting hot in here. When you're working out on the dance floor, it's a wedding, sweat's dripping, you're working, but you're in control. And zone 5, combination of skull and wailing face emojis. The last few seconds of a spin class when you think you might fall off the bike, that sort of thing. I absolutely love these descriptions because really they're just examples of rating of perceived exertion. So if you can take these sentiments and apply them to your intervals, then you'll probably be hitting the right paces. Zone 4 is getting hot in here, you're in control, but you're feeling the burn. That would be really good for a tempo or some longer intervals, mile repeats, that sort of a thing. The skull crushing effort. I never really want you guys to crush your skulls, but when you're working quite hard, that would be appropriate for shorter intervals, maybe 2 to 3 minutes. Zone 2, something that's manageable, would probably be like an easy run. Though you should note that within a tempo, maybe you start out feeling the burn and at the end you're like, whew, that was really hard. These zones are fluid. Like you may hop from zone to, it's not like it's this like black and white thing. It's completely normal to fluctuate between efforts and zones and paces as the workout goes on. Because yeah, the last rep probably is harder than the first, and that's pretty normal. So one more science moment here. I want to look at the heart rate response to exercise. So in this graph, 2 people are exercising at, let's say, 8 miles an hour for a few minutes. So a steady pace, the pace isn't changing. Right at time 0, start exercising, and you can see it takes a few minutes for their heart rates to climb. And then the trained athlete's heart rate steadies out for the duration of the exercise, then falls when they're done. The untrained athlete's heart rate continues to climb for the entire exercise, and then when they're done, it starts to drop again, just like the trained athlete. So here, probably the trained athlete is working below their lactate threshold because their heart rate's reaching a steady state, yada, yada. The untrained athlete is probably above their lactate threshold because their heart rate continues to climb the entire time. With this in mind, there's a few heart rate zone drawbacks. So I found another heart rate zone chart. This is very typical. You'll see it anywhere. But I kind of want to pick it apart, mostly zone 5, max zone. So they suggest that this is a zone rate time of 0 to 2 minutes, and it tones the neuromuscular system and increases max sprint speed. So first of all, I have no idea what toning the neuromuscular system means. Last I checked, my neuro system isn't toned. I don't even really know what it looks like. But okay, bad jokes. But like we just saw, it takes several minutes for heart rate to climb during exercise. So what'll happen is if you're doing a really short sprint or something, even a 1 minute interval, even a 2 minute interval, your heart rate doesn't reflect the intensity that you're working at. Your heart rate may actually be quite low considering how hard you're working. So it doesn't really work for very short sprints. Heart rate also doesn't reach a steady level during more intense intervals like we saw with the untrained athlete. It'll keep climbing throughout the interval. So it's impossible to say like my tempo heart rate is 165 because it might be 165 at the beginning of a tempo, and without changing effort at the end of the tempo, it might be 175, and that's to be expected. 175 might be the heart rate that you have at the end of a 3 minute interval at the beginning of a workout on another day. So these zones aren't like black and white exactly, like they're a fluid sort of thing. Heart rate's also affected by caffeine, by heat, by hydration, even medication. The 220 minus your age formula to predict max heart rate works for most people, but it doesn't work for everyone. It's quite individual. So all these things impact what your zone estimations are, should be even day to day. And also heart rate zones change with fitness changes. So if you were to do a VO2 max test or a field test and get your zones, they're only relevant when you're that fitness. 6 months later, they might not be relevant at all. So this is how I would suggest to use heart rate in training. I don't want to bash it by any means, but this is how I think it's the most effective. First of all, for easy runs. So you can estimate your heart rate during easy runs with, Faye, what's the formula?
180 minus your age.
Yeah, so that's a good estimation of what your heart rate during easy runs should be about. It's nice to monitor easy run intensity because it's pretty easy for that heart rate to climb, and then all of a sudden you're working too hard for it to really be a recovery run, but not hard enough for it to give the benefits of a hard interval session. So you're just becoming fatigued with no bang for your buck, which again is polarized training. So that's where I use my heart rate monitor, especially when I'm training at altitude, because sometimes heart rate's really sneaky there and it's way higher than you think it is. So just being cognizant of what this easy run is, and if it's making sure it's easy enough. That said, and I've said this to a few of our athletes where it's really, really hot, it is normal during an easy run for heart rate again to creep up as you become more dehydrated because your blood becomes thicker. And so it's harder to pump through your body, and so your heart rate will rise. So the idea of this is, I mean, for myself, my max easy run heart rate is about 150. So what I don't want is to start an easy run at a heart rate of 155. But at the end, for the last 10 minutes, if it's 155, that's fine. It's also really useful to use heart rate for recovery. So if you look at your resting heart rate every morning, you can kind of figure out where your baseline is. It's pretty normal to have a higher resting heart rate the day after a really hard workout. That means that you're not recovered yet, which is exactly what you would expect. So the next day should be full of easy training. Also, if your heart rate suddenly rises, you may be getting sick. So again, another reason to take it a little bit easier. And then finally, it's kind of cool after hard workouts to review your heart rate, see how high it got, see if you can make sure that your tempo run, wasn't only a teeny tiny bit faster than an easy run because you've been sandbagging or something like that. No one does that, so I'm joking. But it's just another piece of data, so I think it's cool to look at, but I grapple with using it to structure all of the hard efforts.
And just along with heart rate, I'm sure just because Whoop has become really popular now, as has fancy watches that probably do this too now, is if you guys are, monitoring your heart rate variability, that can also be a useful tool to manage recovery as well.
Totally. Yeah. So if you guys don't know what heart rate variability is, so your heart rate, say your resting heart rate is 60 beats per minute. So your heart rate doesn't beat exactly every second for 60 seconds to give you 60 beats per minute. It'll be a little bit less than on the second, and then the next one's maybe a little bit further. And the more variable heart rate is, the more recovered you are, because it shows that your neuromuscular system is really, really primed, not toned, primed. So it's ready to react to changes and whatnot. And that means that you're very well rested and recovered. When you're more tired, that variability actually drops because your neural system's just a little bit sloppier at reacting to changes, beat per beat per beat.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And the point kind of is use a whole bunch of different pieces of evidence, to see where you're at. Don't just use don't be so stuck on one thing. Like check your heart rate, then check your heart rate variability, then just see how your mood is, see how your legs are feeling, see how your emotions are, see how your appetite is, just don't kind of pick one thing and then just solely blindly this is how I'm going to dictate where I'm at. There's so much wiggle room, so it's better to just have more data points. So so it's either go all in and become a crazy geek on this and really track everything. What I do, because I don't want to do that, is I really do believe in, and this may be different because I've been running for so many years, but I have never ever monitored my heart rate or anything like that. I had a Timex stopwatch. I didn't even have GPS and pace up until just over 2 years ago. Because I just knew my perceived effort. And I would always say I could strap on a heart rate monitor. I'd be within 5 beats per minute, could tell you what my heart rate was. So it's just something that you guys will learn, but it's an important tool to have, because in races, you're not going to have, especially Spartan races and obstacle races, you're not going to have paces. You're not going to be able to say, this is my hard pace, because the paces are irrelevant. So you're going to need to know, this is my hard effort. And as more intervals and workouts you guys do, you'll just get better at that perceived exertion. But I definitely think that for recovery, if you're one of those people that is having a hard time keeping your easy days easy, it's just a good almost babysitter to kind of keep you in line so you're not hammering your recovery runs.
All right. So let's talk about running economy now, how to improve running form. So I wanted to show you guys a video of Paula Radcliffe, and if you have no idea who this is, she is one of the best female marathoners of all time. She had the world record for a very, very, very long time in the marathon, and here she's about to win the gold medal at the World Championships in 2005 in the marathon. So she's 2 hours and 20 minutes into her run. Let's look at her form.
As she approaches the Olympic Stadium here, where the great Emil Zatopek did what no man will ever do again, win the Olympic 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters, and marathon. Paula Radcliffe is going to run faster in this marathon in Helsinki than the great.
I wouldn't say it's awesome looking. She's not the most beautiful runner of all time. She has a head bob. She was very famous for having her head bob. Her shoulders are hiked up. Her elbows are side to side. And I know this is the tail end of a marathon, but that means it's revealing her greatest inefficiencies, I guess, or not inefficiencies, but things that you would pick on in form. But she's one of the best ever. And I think it's important to know that all runners have their own running style, and I think your body gravitates towards the path of least resistance. So could she fix her head bob? Yeah, probably, but maybe there's a reason why she's doing it. I don't know. She's one of the best ever. So that doesn't mean that she's a bad runner by any means. To me, I think the goals for running form and running economy are to optimize efficiency and don't get hurt. So the best way to improve running economy, how efficient you are, is to run more, to strength train, and to stay mobile. Because even though Paula Radcliffe had this head bop and her high shoulders and stuff, where she's putting her weight is still very, very good. She's still very mobile. She's very stable, and she ran a ton. So that's made her very efficient. So it may not look like how you think it is, but her running economy is actually excellent. Whoops. A bit more on that. We had a question about cadence come in before we made this presentation. And so speed comes from increasing cadence or from lengthening out your stride. And everyone has an optimal cadence. It's not necessarily the 180 steps per minute that gets thrown around all the time. Like that was really buzzy a few years ago. I read a really cool study when I was making this presentation, and it was done in like 10 ultra marathoners who just finished a 14-hour race. And through the race, all 10 of them maintained pretty much the same cadence for all 14 hours. But one runner's cadence was like 210 steps per minute, and another runner's cadence was like 160 steps per minute. And those stayed unchanged for the entire 14 hours, but they were very different between people. And those two runners, the 210 step per minute and the 160 step per minute, finished like 3 minutes apart in this race. And amongst the runners, the steps per minute averaged out to about 180, which was kind of perfect, but there was a lot of within runner variability. So I would not suggest forcing yourself to run exactly 180 steps per minute or anything like that, because again, I really believe that your body knows what it's doing. That said, since speed comes from either increasing your cadence or lengthening out your stride, overstriding isn't ideal. And that's when your stride is really, really long. It will lengthen when you run faster, but you don't want it to be excessively long, because then you're pulling on muscles and joints and tendons and stuff where you're really not supposed to be. If you find that happening, then that's something to look at. Or if you're injured a lot, that's something to look at. I'm not a huge fan of changing running form in healthy athletes, but if you're injured, then definitely you need to figure out why that's happening, and if there's things to change, then that's something to look at. Also, if you're stuck in a gear, like sometimes you'll get, this happens a lot for people doing long runs, or if they've done a lot of like distance work lately, it can be really hard to get your legs moving. So when you're doing that, perhaps you're overstriding and you've reached your max stride length. Instead, you can think about increasing your cadence, and strides and speed work can help with that. Running drills, we had a question on that too. They can improve economy for sure, but they're one of many things that help. So other things that help running economy, like we said, is strength work, is running more, is just having more power, stiff tendons, that sort of thing. So drills can help, but they're probably the icing on the cake that I would only add in if you're already recovering perfectly and doing all your mileage and doing all your strength and doing all your supplementary exercises and you still have time. Then it would be something to look at. And then finally, activation exercises. I do think these are very important. The activation exercises and the glute stability work I give you guys, that improves hip stability. It improves like your pelvis alignment. It improves activation of your really strong glute muscles. And this is very important for efficient running, powerful running, both in terms of running economy and also injury prevention. So that's what I would consider to be like fixing your form, is just making yourself more stable and more able to deal with the demands of running that are being thrown at you. So this is great. You've been training a lot. Your running economy is top notch. You think your VO2 max and your lactate threshold are higher. How do you know? How do you figure it out? So obviously, to measure progress, the most clear-cut way is a time trial or a race, but that's not always possible. Also, paces and heart rates during runs. So as you train more, of course, your paces in your intervals, in your tempos, and in your easy runs will come down, as will your heart rate at a given pace. And then most of all, but maybe the most subtly, is your tolerance of training. So as you build mileage, you're running more than you ever have before, you're recovering quicker than you ever have before. Those are really, really indicative of better fitness, even though they're not a PR or a ribbon or anything like that. That's huge. If you're able to do more running than you've ever done, then like you're nailing it. I will mention with the training paces during overtime. So after you've been training for a few years, easy run pace might not actually change that much, or it might change really slowly. But the paces that you do your intervals at should continuously improve. Just wanted to mention that because sometimes people are like, man, like my long run's been the same pace for years, and mine has too. But the upper limit of my mile repeats and my kilometer repeats and stuff is way better than it used to be. All right. So now you've actually been training for years and you're now an aging athlete. What to expect. So after about the age of 40, you can expect a decline in your VO2 max of about 10% per decade, and your muscle strength and power starts to decline after age 40 as well. With that, road race results have been shown to be pretty much unchanged until the age of 40, and then seem to reduce by about 1% a year. That increases to about 1.5% a year after ages 65 to 70. So not a gargantuan amount, but not nothing. However, many of these changes aren't really related to aging. They're more related to the sedentary lifestyle and maybe the weight gain and whatnot that happens with most people as they go through life. So this decline in VO2 max of about 10% per decade can be halved with regular training. Same with the muscle strength and power. You can preserve so much of your strength and lean muscle mass if you just continue to strength train. It's really a use or lose it type deal. What will change is that you'll probably need more recovery, but that's okay. You might not be able to train how you did when you were 20, but you shouldn't train how you did when you were 20. It's going to take longer to recover. If you did, you'd probably get hurt. And you have years and years and years of training and life behind you, so you actually don't need to train as hard as you did in your 20s. I was absolutely shocked. One of my Olympic peers is a 10K runner, really good 10K runner. She has the Canadian record. Her 10K PB is, I think, 31:40. So she's been to the Olympics and Worlds and stuff, and she's in her late 30s. And I was absolutely floored by her mileage. It's less than mine. And she runs the 10K. I only run the 5K. And it's because she simply doesn't need to run that much. She needs really good intensity in her workouts, and she trains really smart. And same with some of the older marathoners that I know who are in their mid 40s. They're still making Olympic teams and whatnot, and they train very different than some of the younger marathoners I know. Maybe a little bit less mileage, more recovery days, but it still works. They're still performing at a very high level. It's just smart training. And if you're previously untrained or you don't have a history of decades and decades and decades of exercise behind you, you have a huge capacity to improve fitness and results and whatnot as you continue to train, even if you're older. Just because if you don't use it, you lose it, but you can get it back or gain it if you don't have it yet. So even if you start strength training in your 50s or 60s, you can still gain muscle mass, stuff like that. Yeah, maybe had you been training in your 20s, that maybe you would race a bit faster then versus if you started in your 40s or 50s, but you still have a tremendously large capacity to improve. So that I don't think that should be a deterrent by any means. So it's never too late to become fitter, faster, and stronger. So on that note, that's all I've got for you guys. So thank you. That's me. Time for some questions.
So thanks, Jess. Jamie had a question here that she put in the chat. Is it fine to track average heart rate for easy runs since heart rate can climb over time, or do you want to look later to see where it was and then heart rate at the end or the highest?
That's a great question. I think both are good. Like at the end of your run, when you get the printout, or not really a printout, but the summary on your watch, it'll say average heart rate. And I think that that's a good stat to have, and that you definitely want below that that threshold of what your aerobic run would be. But then also just take note of, as it climbs near the end, you don't want it to climb too soon, I guess. Like if you're 10 minutes into your 75-minute run, you don't want to be running above aerobic threshold. But if it's at the end, that's fine. So maybe take note at the end, see what it is. You don't want it in the 180s. But also just look at average, I think, is a good way to do it.
And I would think that, as you get fitter, the first couple times you're doing longer runs, it's you might spend a little bit longer time maybe in that zone, but as you get fitter, I think for me, I'm not crazy fit right now, but I'm noticing that because I'm not in great shape, when I do my long run, I'm kind of getting it, my heart rate's getting higher. I'm kind of in that zone for the last 15 minutes where normally I would only be there for the last 5 minutes or something. And that just, it really shows just a little bit of deconditioning on my part. But ideally you would adjust in intensity kind of to keep it lower. I just run with certain people and I don't really have options or I get behind, which isn't ideal, right? Because then you're kind of in that sort of zone that you shouldn't really be in. But I think it's complete, especially in the heat, it's just going to come up. I have a hard time when it's really humid here to keep mine below that zone. So it's a little bit on the higher end, but I know that's just a function of the heat and humidity. So I don't worry too much about it. Any other questions?
Do you have a favorite watch for tracking heart rate, mileage, GPS? I've tried a couple different ones and I feel like there's just wildly varying accuracies, especially with mileage and GPS.
Mm-hmm. I like my Garmin. I've never had any problems with it. It's pretty bread and butter standard, and it seems fairly accurate. I will say mine's a really standard model. I had a fancier one and it was touchscreen and all that, and I ended up giving it to my boyfriend because the touchscreen wasn't responsive enough for what I wanted it to do. I wanted to take really exact intervals, and half the time it wouldn't hit right, and I'd be looking at it as I was running and it was driving me nuts. And so I got a more basic model that has buttons. So it's things like that are a little bit sneaky, but the accuracy of his nicer model and mine seems to be the same.
And you really need a heart rate strap if you actually want to accurate heart rate reading. You really, really do. I have a Suunto, and I have not once checked my heart rate because I know it's wrong, because I just getting it off my wrist, which is a really inaccurate way to get your heart rate. You would need to have a chest strap.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's the things I get from the chest strap versus the watch are wildly different sometimes, especially with intensity. I find mine's not bad for easy runs, or I know it's in the realm of, if it's in the realm of accuracy of what seems right, then it's normally right. When it's wrong, it's no, that's definitely wrong. So that's nice, but the chest strap is much better.
So Jess, I don't know if this is completely wrong or not, but you know what I do sometimes? I do old school, what we learned in literally I stop sometimes in my middle of run, get this for 10 seconds, times it by 6, and I get I feel that's more of an accurate heart rate than this thing without a heart rate strap, to be honest.
Wow.
So I would get the watches are so expensive, so you might as well spend the extra $40 to get the strap as well, so you can actually use the functionality of the watch.
You just wear the strap your whole run. Do you wear a strap most of the time?
I don't. I know exactly what my heart rate is. Just, I'm just amazing like that. I can tell you that what it is.
They drink so much coffee that heart rate's not going to work for her anyway.
I kind of know. I use okay, we're going to come back to this, which we've talked about before, but I do use the talk test. If I can go for a run with my friends and be talking the whole time and holding a conversation, I can guarantee that I'm in the aerobic zone. Why? Because aerobic means with oxygen. If I didn't have any oxygen, I wouldn't be able to be talking, right? So it means that I'm comfortable, I'm taking in air, I'm utilizing it. I'm more aerobic than anaerobic.
Okay, wait. That's not exactly how it works. The reason why the talk test works is because as your VO2 goes up, so as your intensity goes up, your ventilation increases at the same rate until all of a sudden it doesn't. It inflects. And that's right about at aerobic threshold. So right exactly where you want that easy run, the upper bound of that easy run to be, is your ventilation starts to increase disproportionate to your intensity increase, which is perfect because if you can talk, you're below that, and if you're above it, you're it's more difficult.
So talking, if you're on a run and you can hold full conversations, just like I said, you're aerobic. If your sentences, if you can still talk, but they're kind of broken up, for me, that's kind of like my tempo. Like I can still speak to someone, but it's kind of broken. It's like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, my lunch was good. Then that's kind of, for me, that's how I perceive my tempo effort. And if I can't get out any words, I know I'm in a really, really hard interval session. Like I'm doing repeat 400s. I'm doing repeat half miles. I'm doing something really, really fast and challenging, like zone 5. Mm-hmm. So I use 3 things. Talking, comfortably holding full conversations is easy. Broken sentence is that tempo effort that is uncomfortable, but you can sustain it. And then no sentences, can barely get out a few words, is zone 5. You're doing 8x800s at 5K race pace, and it's a miserable session, right? That's kind of how I do it. If you guys want to use heart rate, like, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but these do not work for heart rate. You need a chest strap. It is going to skew your guys' data, and it's just going to skew your data, and you're going to be working in either too hard or too easy. It's not even, you're going to know it's off, because my heart rate on this will say 98 and then it'll say 198 half an hour later. Like it is so off. So
don't buy a swim toe is what I'm hearing.
But you really do need a chest strap. And if you guys already spent, $500 on the watch, just buy the chest strap, because it's not that much more.
I got mine in Kijiji for 20, which I thought was a good deal.
Yeah.
Also, I find that if I'm on a run with someone, and normally I don't know them very well, so I don't know what pace we're going to go before, and I ask really long, open-ended questions like, how do you feel about politics? What's your stance on religion? Then I'm probably running a little bit too hard, because I don't want to talk. I want them to talk. What did you do all of last summer? So that's when I start to gravitate towards that. All right.
I know exactly what you're saying. That's actually really helpful. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's good.
Good. Noah is wondering, are things like a Whoop worth it? Is there a gold standard for sleep, etc., or is it more individual? So first of all, I want to say that the best way to recover, the best way, forget Normatec, forget massage gun, forget massage period, or anything, cold tubs, anything. The best way to recover is sleeping. So if before you invest money in this and that and this and that, if you have the time, just sleep a little bit more. That is the best way for your body to heal itself. So is sleep individual, like maybe the amount of sleep you need a night? To a point, but I think a lot of people who say, oh, I don't need that much sleep, I get by on 6 hours, I feel great, actually don't feel great. I think maybe if they tried to sleep a little bit more, they would feel a lot better. Are things like a Whoop worth it? They can be, for sure. But it's a little bit similar to heart rate variability or resting heart rate, where it's just looking at your recovery. And I think that they can be helpful if you're struggling to recover and you're not really sure why, or maybe if you think you're a little bit overtrained. It can be really interesting to track stuff like that. I think the question you have to ask yourself, though, is what am I going to do with the data? So if you're someone who sees a day that you're in the, I don't know how it works exactly, but say the red zone, like you're not recovered, are you going to then go do a workout and then anticipate it going poorly because a thing has told you you're not recovered? Are you going to take the day off? Are you going to like what's your strategy there? And I don't think that there's a right answer necessarily. Like I used to track my heart rate variability and I would never do it leading into a race because I wouldn't want to know, because I had no choice. I had to race. I wouldn't want to know if I was quote unquote unrecovered, which I think would be impossible. I think that would just show nerves for the race because I taper and stuff like that. But I don't want to be told that I'm not ready to race if I have to race. So it becomes a little bit tricky there. Like if you have a very fluid training schedule and if your whoop is in like level red and you're able to rearrange your schedule to do an easy day the next day, or maybe still do a workout but not beat yourself up if it doesn't go as expected, then I think it's a great tool. Or if it's chronically like you're very telling you that you're overtrained, then that's a good way to look at the training. But I think you have to have sort of a strategy on what you're going to do with that data, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I will say just like insiders knowledge on the Whoop, because like, you see like just the various pros always supporting various things. And so I always ask them, I'm like, I know you're getting paid by this company, but just tell me, like, does this actually work? And Robert Killian actually tried to confuse Whoop. Like he tried to change the data to see if he could, be like, this thing just totally doesn't work. And he did like a few experiments on Whoop and he found it actually gave him the correct data. So he like tried to completely screw it up. And I've talked to him about a lot of products, and he really gives me the honest feedback, like offline, off Instagram and stuff when he's away from, people. So I really do trust Lindsay and Robert, and I've had the same conversation with Lindsay Webster about the Whoop. So that makes me a little bit more likely to think that it's more accurate than not.
Mm-hmm. Is it better to jog shuffle recoveries or to push intervals harder and walk recoveries for lactate threshold? That's a really good question. I think it's actually better to jog or shuffle recoveries, and that's because you clear lactate faster when you're jogging. So the more your blood is pumping, the quicker the lactate's going to be cleared out. So if you are pumped full of lactate, like max, like you're like swimming in it, if you walk or jog, it'll clear in about like 10 minutes. You'll be back to resting levels. If you just sit on your butt, you'll be back to resting levels in about 45 minutes. So by jogging recoveries, you're clearing it out a little bit more so that your next interval can be that much harder. That said, shuffling or jogging versus walking, like honestly, I would probably just do what feels right. Unless I note it, I'm not too concerned about what you do on your rest. It's kind of just like whatever you need to get ready for the next interval. But my goal, unless I note it, is for your intervals to be as hard and as fast as they can be. So whatever you do in the rest to get you ready for the next interval versus using the rest as another training tool. And then if someone knows that they have a relatively low cadence, closer to the 160 range, is there a key to think about whether it's just her body or if she's not in an ideal overstriding place? I think what I would do is, do an experiment, play around with moving your legs a little bit quicker and see how you feel. And if it feels really, really, really awkward, then maybe it's not right. Because at the end of the day, you're not able to, there's no way like 3 hours into a race, you're going to be like, oh, pick up my cadence. But maybe it will feel okay if you just practice it a bit. So I would within a run play around, see how it feels, and see if your pace naturally gravitates to be a lot quicker with not much more effort. Like in case it's just sort of like a funny pattern that you have. And also we could add in some strides and stuff into your training to just work on turnover to make a quicker cadence feel less abnormal. So the athlete who's asking this, Caroline, she trains more for ultras than for 5Ks. So she doesn't have as much speed work as many of our other athletes. So I think, I can't remember your program directly offhand, but I think you don't do quite as much.
Feels fast to me.
Yeah. But no, you don't really have any like 1 minute intervals, very rarely, or 30-second strides or anything like that. So maybe that's a gap. So I would say that next program we could look into adding something like that if you are concerned about cadence, and see how your body responds to that. And if it likes it, then I think perhaps your cadence will naturally gravitate upwards as it becomes less foreign.
And there's, I think there's like an app or something that you can download that gives you that cadence of 180, and it like dings, 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 dings. So, I mean,
That sounds awful.
Yeah. No, don't do that. Please don't do that.
Minutes, or I don't know if you just want to save that.
In one of the studies I read on cadence, it said that you can change it within about 10% of what you naturally gravitate to, and it doesn't cost more energy. But if you change it by more than that, you just become less efficient. So that's sort of your bandwidth to play around in.
Yeah, and one thing that we talked about, Jessica talked about before, like running economy and running drills and all of that stuff, is we don't do any of that with you guys. Because
the drills is what you
drills. We're talking about like A skips, B skips, like just literally breaking down the running stride and working on skills. So we don't do any of that with you guys. And the reason is because you're going to get way more bang for your buck by spending your time actually running and gaining fitness and gaining strength and stability and doing the activation and all that stuff. However, if you guys do, have extra time on your hands, or just you do have the
desire,
those little extra 1% things such as running drills and stuff, like don't be afraid to just like tell us that you guys want those in your program and we can throw them in. We're just not the type of coaches that are going to give you, we understand you guys are professional athletes and we're not going to give you absolutely everything you could possibly do to be the best athlete. We're going to give you the things that are going to get the most bang for your buck with the time that you guys have available to train. So, but if you guys are interested in doing some of that work, like obviously Jessica and I used to do running drills all the time, just when I was running short stuff in track, like 800s and 1500 meter races, but I stopped doing them as I've gotten longer because they didn't really do anything for me, because the percentage of error is so much bigger when you're running the longer races than just having to run for 2 minutes at a time in a short event. So.
Great. Any last questions?
How do I figure out what my tempo pace is? Like I'm getting into some workouts, but I don't know what it is. So I just run what I think is hard enough. If that makes sense.
Our most common question: what the heck is tempo pace? So, I wish that I could tell you exactly what your tempo pace is. The ways to predict it are, like Faye was saying, it's a pace where you can be like, turn right, let's go there for lunch, but not carry on long conversations, and not be limited to like single word answers either. So which I know is not, I know what you're looking for is like, it's exactly this per mile.
But not so much then, I guess maybe like on a, like an effort scale, like is it like a 6 or 7? Like,
oh yeah, I'd say it's about a 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and so Jess, I'm pretty sure you sent this in that document with all the paces. There's a calculator there.
Yeah.
So what you could do is you could put your latest 5K time trial in that calculator, and it'll spit out your zones and it'll spit out your tempo pace.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What tempo is it's at your aerobic threshold.
Anaerobic. It's at lactate
threshold. It's a pace you could hold for an hour. And that, like, if you had a gun to your head, that's really what tempo is. Like that's that effort. Cyclists call it something else, but like any like lots of endurance sports, they have that kind of 1 hour at your anaerobic threshold pace, and they call that tempo, threshold, you know,
steady state. There's like the problem with exercise physiology is there's 30 terms that all mean the exact same thing or like subtly different things. But I would like to find your tempo pace. I would, since it is an obscure thing, I would use a variety of things. I would use perceived effort, the 7 out of 10 sort of thing. You can use the calculator. You could calculate your heart rate zones and make sure you fall within the like general range of that. So again, not black and white, but like, okay, I'm within like 5 beats or 7 beats of plus or minus of what I would estimate this to be. Yeah, that's like all these pieces will kind of get you to a point where you're like, okay, well that I finished that. That was about a 7 out of 10. I'm really happy it's over, but I could have gone longer if I had to, is what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And kind of one more thing I just sort of want to say too is like the concept of polarized training, right? Easy days, easy, hard days, hard. Like that doesn't mean that your hard, say, tempo days are at a 7:30 mile pace. That's your tempo pace. And then your easy days are 30 seconds slower at an 8-minute pace. Like that's not polarized enough. Like when Jessica runs her tempo pace, say at 5-minute miles, but she runs her easies, like I ran with her, like sometimes it's like 8-minute miles. Like there's a 3-minute spread there. And what that is saying is that her training is like really, really polarized. Like don't think that it's just a difference of 30 seconds here or there, because if it's just a difference of 30 seconds, you're likely kind of in that same zone. You're not separating the zones well enough. Mm-hmm. So making sure there's, depending on your pace, you know, a 2-minute difference between those hard intervals and your easy running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll use myself for an example. That's a good idea, Faye. So my easy running pace would be about 7:30 miles. My tempo pace is around 5:30. And then my like 5K pace work, 10K pace work is around 5 or just under 5, like 4:50 type deal. So tempo is closer to like longer interval pace than it is to easy pace. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but that calculator, I think, that Jessica gave, like, is pretty good. Like, if you honestly have like some stats, like an honest all out, like 5K or 10K, or, you know, you were one race where you really ran your maximum and you put those in those race predictors and spit out those zones, they're pretty good, and they give like a pretty good range, so it can account for weather and like age and like all that other stuff. Like there is a range there. It's not just like you need to run at this heart rate or this pace. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty good range.
Yeah. Okay, well guys, I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much for coming and listening in, and we'll get this posted. And I hope that cleared some things up. And if you're still confused, like please, by all means, ask us lots and lots of questions or send emails or whatever, because we definitely want to make sure that everything is crystal clear and you know what you're doing. Okay. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys.